Hi, I'm Stefan with Revival Cycles, and we're back with another Tech Talk. Today we're talking about a few techniques for splicing wires and joining wires when you need to make an extension or you need to add a few extra wires to your wire harness, and we're also going to get into a little bit of details about heat shrink. It might sound boring, but trust me, this is really interesting stuff. So, you're wiring your motorcycle and you find that you've got a wire that came out, I don't know what, like a foot too short, and you're left with this option where you could try and pull the wire all the way back and run a full new one, but it's all got loom on it, or maybe it's still taped up from the factory, and you just really want to extend it just a little bit. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So, we've got some wire, and we'll say that this wire is going to be the one on the bike, and this is the one we're going to extend it with. First thing I'll do is strip back, I don't know, about a centimeter or so, which is in SAE terms is about a half an inch, more or less. None of those distances are that critical. You just need to have enough wire to work with, but you don't want too much because it makes the joint bigger than you need it to be. So I'll do the same thing on that other wire, and then I'm going to kind of put them up in a cross like that, and with a thumb and a forefinger, fold them over on each other and start to twist them together. Just like that. Now, this all seems pretty straightforward and standard, but now I'm going to actually solder this. With this alligator clip, I can hold it in position. I'm going to need some solder. Amazing, it just happens to be right at arm's length. And then we're going to need a soldering iron. Again, just right there. Move this over a little, and now can dab a little bit of solder in, heat up the joint, and voila, that wets out. There's lots of tutorials on YouTube about how to solder, so I'm not going to get into too many details about how to do that properly. You can find those in many different places. So that gets us electrically connected. This will at least conduct current. You can power whatever it is, but it doesn't really isolate from short circuits, and it doesn't give us any mechanical strain relief. One of the problems you get with a solder joint like this is the solder will actually wick in underneath the insulation of the wire just a little bit, and that will make that section of it stiff. And even as I bend it, you can see that that's how far that solder actually went into the braid of the wire. So that would be the location we would expect to find a fatigue failure in this joint, and that's a mechanical failure. So we're going to now add a little bit of heat shrink over the top of this. So we've got this product, and I'll get in a little bit more of it. This is just a nice assortment of heat shrink that we offer on our website, and I'm going to pull out a little piece of it that's the right diameter and measure out, I don't know, enough to overlap that section that was stiff inside the wire, and that looks like it's about that far. Careful not to cut the wire you just soldered, and you get to do it all over again. And then slide that into position. I'm going to hold it with one hand and get my trusty heat gun and shrink this down. Now, this heat shrink is what is known as a dual wall heat shrink, and that means that it's got two layers. One is a polyolefin outer layer, and that's kind of standard heat shrink material, but then inside is a layer of kind of like hot melt glue that will seal this up and add a little bit more strain relief. It is a nice heat shrink because it keeps any of the moisture or corrosive materials off of your solder joint, and it also provides that extra layer of strain relief that we were kind of talking about, so you don't end up with a fatigue failure of the wire inside the insulation. Turn that off, it takes a second. But now as this cools, we've completed that joint. So now we've got this wire extended. You can move on to doing your end termination, making the connector, getting it hooked up to your gauge, whatever it is that you were trying to do. But this is actually a very nice, robust joint. You can move it around, and it can vibrate, it can shake, it can rattle, and all that stuff, and it won't fail on you. You know it's got great electrical connection, you know it has great mechanical support, you're good to go. This is way better than just the basic butt connection crimpers that you see on trailers all over the place where the lights don't work. Those don't work because they corrode, you get terrible electrical contact through it, and then the crimp itself creates this perfect area for the wire to fatigue where it was crimped, because it flattens out and then it shakes and vibrates and it'll just break itself over time. So that's the straightforward splice, super simple. Now, I'll show you another one. We'll just cut this piece out that I just did. And this is a technique that I like to use if I need to have one wire turn into several wires. If you're installing an M unit, you'll find that the auxiliary output ends up with a lot of different wires on it, and what you usually find is you need to have one wire leaves the M unit and then it needs to go to like 4 or so different components. This is one of the techniques that I'll use for doing that. You've got your main wire going through, and I'm going to kind of just strip a section right in the middle of that. So I'm going to start, I'm going to make a little notch and just break the insulation on that, and then I'm going to move up about, I don't know, between 1/8 and 1/4 inch, and I'm going to break another small section of the insulation. Now, that just split the insulation, just barely. And now I can use a knife and shave off just one side of that insulation, and then I can peel the rest away. Now, doing it that way, I was able to make that splice pretty easily and quickly, but also didn't strip or break any of the strands of the wire itself. So this is still a full stranded wire, no frays or anything like that. And I've got a little section exposed where I can add an additional wire. So let's say that I need to add this one. I'll do the same thing that I just did. Make that little notch. Make another little notch. And then with the knife, strip out that little center section. Of course, you want to be careful so you don't slice your fingers and bleed all over your bench, because then you got to stop what you're doing and clean that up, and that's going to cost you time in the long run. Then, again, kind of like the last one, we'll take and loop the two over each other, just like that. Sometimes you want wires to go one way and the other way, and then you could do it kind of like this, where you've got 2 wires going back, 2 wires going forward, or you can even kind of fold them all over in one direction so you've got 1 wire splitting into 3 wires going forward. Of course, the next thing we got to do, solder this. So I'm going to arrange that so I've got a good access to the joint. Grab that handy dandy solder iron and dab a little bit of solder on that. What I've found, the one notable thing about soldering that I find is if you can get a little bit of solder to just kind of drop down onto the wire itself, it kind of acts like a heat sink and helps you transfer heat into the joint, and then once it warms up, it's really easy to add solder to the rest of the joint. And that looks pretty good. So now we've got our solder joint. Same as the last time, we have the risk of a mechanical failure due to stress fatigue, and this could, of course, electrically short. So back to the bag of heat shrink. I'm going to dig around for a slightly larger tube for this one. There we go. Eyeball that. That looks about right. Slip that over the end. And get the heat gun and shrink it down. Again, this is that same double-walled heat shrink that's going to create a seal. It's going to melt that inner layer of basically hot melt sealant, and that will adhere to the outer insulation of the wire and seal this up so that it doesn't get any moisture in to corrode that solder joint that you just made. And it also served to give you some strain relief to keep this from fatiguing under vibration. Nice and simple, nothing to it. And there you have it. We just turned 1 wire into 3 wires. This is a really handy technique that I use on almost every build that we do here, and I wanted to share this with you guys so you knew how to do it yourselves. That leaves us to talk a little bit more detail on the heat shrink itself. We've been talking about this kit, and we offer 2 different versions of this kit. There is the dual wall that I've been using so far in this demonstration, and you get an assortment of 20 different pieces, 6 inches in length, and this is high quality heat shrink. It has a 3-to-1 shrink ratio. That means that this, it's about a 1/4 inch piece of heat shrink, is able to shrink to 1/3 its normal size. I don't feel like doing the math in my head right now, so you can figure out exactly what that minor diameter would be after it's fully shrunk. But trust me, most heat shrink is a 2-to-1. This is 3-to-1. 4-to-1 does exist, but it's usually more expensive, and the issue with that is as it shrinks down that 4-to-1 ratio, the wall thickness gets really big, and that means that you're left with this big chunk of heat shrink on your wire, and that can be hard to hide in a loom. Because of that exact reason, you don't always want to use the dual wall heat shrink. There are some times where you just don't have room, or you don't have a lot of splices. You really just need to use a conventional heat shrink. We offer another kit. It looks exactly like this, but it's a single wall heat shrink, and that's this type of heat shrink. This is only a single wall polyolefin heat shrink, and it's a 2-to-1 shrink ratio. And that means that you're always going to end up with a thinner wall in the final shrunk state, and that can be a little bit easier for packaging if you're trying to fit this into a tight section of loom or you just don't have room. The single wall 2-to-1 heat shrink is the way to go. Another tip that I have always wanted to share with people, and it took me a while to figure out for myself, is that when you're making a series of splices, if you have several wires in one section of loom that need to be extended or spliced or modified, try to stagger them so that they don't all land in the same spot. If you have all your splices in the exact same spot, that heat shrink stacks on top of each other and you end up with one big bundle right in the middle. If you can stagger it out, well, then you've got one and they overlap each other, kind of more like a freight train of splices, and they lay down in the loom a lot smaller. So that's kind of the gist of it. I know heat shrink may not be that exciting, but we do have this history of being really nerdy at Revival, and we wanted to make sure we found the absolute best heat shrink that's available, and we wanted to offer that to you guys so you could make your bikes as good as possible. Now, that's pretty much what we wanted to cover in this episode, but I do want to remind you, all these products and a whole lot more are available at revivalcycles.com. And we sell the exact same things that we use to build the bikes that we build. And we offer them to you because we've spent a lot of time figuring out what works, what doesn't, what's the best way to do what we're doing. And we wanted to offer that to you in a concise, easy to navigate place, and that is why we have revivalcycles.com. So go check it out, find what you like. Please support us so we can make more of these videos and keep you building professional level bikes and get your projects done and back on the road. Thanks for watching.